Welcome back to Talk of the Town with PG Sittenfeld. And to my, I think something a few people have probably heard before, but might be a little bit surprised to know about me. I actually do not own a television. I know it's a little bit strange, but it's overall a life decision. I'm glad. It doesn't mean I don't see TV, but I don't necessarily need that in my...
You're a strange guy.
I am a strange guy for many reasons. So I'm going to have to ask you this. How many political ads would you say you've seen in the last 6 months?
6 months?
More fingers and toes than you have.
Yeah,
yes.
Definitely. Especially, for me, too, I will be transparent and say I am an MSNBC addict. So right. I watch a lot of... The only thing I watch is, MSNBC and ESPN. So between those two, especially MSNBC, I see a lot of political ads.
And if you would just, again, sort of rough guess, what % of the political advertisements you've seen would you say have been negative?
Probably 75%.
75%.
Yeah.
So, one thing that's on my mind is, is negative advertising here to stay? But I want to go back so everyone can sort of formulate their answer in their mind to the question of, will campaigns and the tone of campaigns, is there any hope for them changing anytime in our lifetime, in my great-grandkids' lifetime? But back to the question about why we ended up here, Professor Beaupre, when we think about the tone the politicians set, when we think about the pundits on television who are trying to drive ratings. I also think, I at the end of the day believe we get the government we deserve. If people continue to accept and put up with it and frankly reward things like negative advertisements, maybe we all need to look in the mirror when we think about where the discourse has gone. But what's your thought on how we got here?
Well, and one of the, that's a great description. I think one of the things that reinforces that, and we got here because we allowed legislators, for instance, to create nonprofits that could, raise money without any accountability of who gave to them and say anything they want. And, in the name, I guess, of free speech, although I think free speech can still be accountable to who said it. Facebook and the Inquirer is a great example of that. It hasn't diminished significantly. In fact, probably improved the dialogue.
I would agree, yeah.
There's a myriad of factors, but the bottom line is, as I said earlier, I think two things. I think it's the loss of sense of community, and when you think about when we did this negotiation, I was also involved in it was called Getting to Yes back then, about how you would have positive negotiation. You sat down at the table with somebody with the idea that you both wanted to get up whole and not, get up intact. And, that's not the approach anymore. It's destroy your enemy instead. Campaign politics is devoted to that, as all the politicians in the room know.
Is that new?
No, it's not new. I mean, the formula was for as long as I can remember, was probably to create an image of yourself as much as you could, and then create an image of your opponent, which was not favorable. And then at the end of the campaign, you came back to that wonderful image you created of yourself, hopefully. Now they just kind of skip a lot of the other parts and just destroy the enemy.
David, you arrived in Congress with President Clinton, and I can't help but, again, as we watch the sort of the conventions unfold, it's been amusing for me to think about people sort of seeming wistfully nostalgic for even Clinton and Gingrich worked together and almost making it seem like it was kumbaya, which we know it wasn't. But how did we get here?
Well, as you mentioned, part of the reason that we got here and that we're here is that it works. Negative ads. Right. I cannot tell how many times when I was active, people would say, "I'm so sick of those negative ads. I wish they wouldn't run them." And then you look at the election results, and the most effective negative ads have their impact. And the same thing, I think, applies to public discourse. Politicians, elected officials, look for what works effectively, not just when it comes to campaign time, but when it comes time to debating public issues. And if framing the issue in a way that's controversial and that develops heat is successful, then that's what you're going to do, unfortunately. And so it comes back to what we expect out of our elected officials. And that's what this particular initiative is about, to talk with each other about rewarding a different style of behavior.
I don't want the sort of outcomes of this conversation to be sort of depressing and deflating for our listeners, but is there anyone on the panel who thinks that the tone of our discourse, the tone of political campaigns is going to dramatically improve in the next 5 years, in the next lifetime?
Well, I think there's a realization that, there is a problem. So that's, sure. I think,
that's
the
start,
first step.
Right. Acknowledge the problem.
Yeah, and people like David and Gene and the Beyond Civility group taking some leadership, speaking up about it, is a way to get people talking about it and to find some solutions. So I think there's some recognition that we have a problem and we can start to work to make it better.
My sense is that more and more people do think there's a problem and do want to have a different kind of public debate. How much it can change, I don't know. But there is that sense, that longing for a different style of conversation, I think.
Bishop Dantley, can we look to the pastor to give us some hope here?
Well, I was sitting here thinking that I'm going to take a more philosophical and theological approach to this, as one might suspect. I think that we are so, as a culture, so self-absorbed and so ignited by our own self-interests that until we begin to, as Gene has talked about, see ourselves as part of a community, to see ourselves as part of a collective, then this kind of discourse is going to remain. So I'm hoping that initiatives that David is a part of and others, that's going to help us at least begin to look at the discourse that's currently pervasive in our society.
Professor Beaupre, I wanted to actually ask you. You can be sort of the ambassador for the 18, 19, 20-year-old students that you get to interact with.
That's a reach.
I'm giving you that permission. I don't know if they would give it to you, but what's their reaction to, when they look at the pundits on Fox News or on MSNBC? Do they say this person is delivering me the news and the truth, or do they sort of take it as, okay, these are pundits, these are folks who are trying to drive ratings beyond? How do they look at the punditry class today that obviously does have a major impact on the conversation?
I'd like to. Let me put it this way. The students that I have, I think, are more involved and kind of get deeper into the issues. But even those students, like other students, come in with a scorecard. I mean, that's what people do now. Oh, so-and-so got so-and-so. I had a guy stop me in the hallway the other day and say, you think Romney's dead? And I thought, Jesus, has he been attacked? And it was over that quote that was, he'd had the day before. But they want to count him out. They want to cross him off the card. And, that's so contrary to what we ought to be doing. And so, unfortunately, I'd like to say, gee, it's a new generation and, they're going to make us all look bad. I'd love it if they made us look bad. I'd love it. But and to the extent that I can do something, we try and create a sense of community and try and create a new way of communicating. But in the end, a lot of them, they'll keep score.
Right. I don't pretend these are easy questions here today, but that's why we're lucky we have such a brilliant panel. Dave, I've got to imagine that of the editorials that have been written in the Inquirer over the last, probably 4 or 5 years, and the letters to the editor that you get, the economy is obviously where everyone's attention is. Do you think the sort of new normal economy we've been living in, the recession that we started in 2008 and has been, I think, sort of slow to get back to where we want to be, has that changed the political conversation, do you think? Has it made it worse?
I think it has. And I mentioned before the anger that's out there, and I think that has something to do with it, the economy. People have not just lost jobs, but, family members have lost jobs. They've taken pay cuts. They've seen their retirement accounts diminished, and they feel powerless about that. And
precipitates anger, I guess, when
exactly.
You feel powerless.
So they're angry about that. And so I think that has had an impact.
Yeah. Bishop Dantley, would you agree? When you think about your congregants who you interact with on a daily and weekly basis, have you sensed a change in tone or attitude from them as they've been dealing with a totally new economy?
Oh yeah, definitely. But I see my role as offering hope and getting my folks, especially those folks who are in my congregation, to see themselves as living out of this situation and finding ways, even internally, to see themselves in a better position than they are in.
Right. I think one sentiment that is shared across this is people do recognize there's a problem, and they do actually want it to be better. So, David, would you offer, or would anyone on the panel offer concrete tips? And it probably starts with, Michael Jackson, man in the mirror sort of stuff. Make sure that your tone is sort of meeting a civil standard. But, David, concrete tips you would offer to people to improve the overall discourse?
Listen to the people you disagree with. And make sure you understand what they really are saying. This is hard, and I find myself not doing that. Particularly when I feel intensely about the political environment, I start reading an article about the other side, and I'm immediately...
You want to plug your ears
no,
and say that.
I want to agree. I want to interpret it in a way that is consistent with my side. And when it comes to public issues, that's not the way to have success communicating. So what I have to do is say, okay, what things in here might be something that I would agree with if they were framed differently, discussed differently, and how can I come back in a way that the other side, who feels just as strongly as I do, might see some common ground.
Right. What else?
Listen,
What other sort of concrete tips for improving the discourse?
I'm sorry. I really agree with David that if you can learn to not necessarily have to be the first one to talk, and instead be the first one to listen. And as he's describing, you survey the answer and see, where's some place where I can plant my flag, and you get some common ground, and you go from there. Now, it's hard to keep that, and you don't even want to do it lots of times when you start, but that's the way you're going to make the most success. I mean, unless you're going to kill the person, basically you want to destroy them one way or another, and that's not going to happen.
I love what you guys are saying, but it does feel to me so at odds with the sort of me culture where, frankly, selfishness seems rewarded. And you think about social media, it's about someone said that Andy Warhol sort of everyone gets to be famous for 15 minutes. It's now everyone gets to be famous to 15 people. That the things that you all are saying of speak second, make sure you're listening. Speaking of speaking second, I'm hogging the mic here. What's Tamaya?
Nothing's new about that.
Yeah. So she keeps me in check. Ouch.
I will say this, though. I think another practical way that we can change the conversation, too, is when you're talking amongst people who have similar beliefs as you, and they're being a little harsh, stop them and say, hey, you don't have to, you might not like them as a candidate, but they might be a good person. I mean, and that's something that we sometimes separate. Like, people are husbands and wives and children, and they have things that they care about. And I think it's just like, I don't agree with you. We may agree about the bottom line, but how we get there, you don't have to say that about him personally because you don't know. So I think that's just a practical way that we can change the conversation amongst ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Before we take a quick break here and come back for the home stretch, I'm going to let our audience mull over this quote. When times are tough and people are frustrated and angry and hurting and uncertain, the politics of constant conflict may be good, but what is good politics does not necessarily work in the real world. What works in the real world is cooperation. That was spoken by Bill Clinton at the recent Democratic Convention. You're listening to Talk of the Town on 1230 The Buzz of Cincinnati. We'll be right back.